Well, hello and welcome to Lecture 9. This is cosmetics today. So, kind of odd thing to be talking about. I never imagined when I was in medical school that I would be talking about cosmetics law, but the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act has cosmetics in it, and so we're going to talk about cosmetics. They have had important public health implications over time. There have been a number of adverse events that have occurred as a result of human vanity and cosmetics and their use, and they are regulated by that same act that regulates most things we put in our mouths to eat with, most drugs we put in our bodies to help us with the sick. They're held right up in that same esteem. So this is Chapter 9 today, and Lecture 9 as well. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, however, does have different standards for cosmetics as compared to food, drugs, medical devices, because there are, frankly, fewer risks associated with their use. When things go bad, they go pretty bad, but generally speaking, it is less risky category of products as compared to foods, drugs, or medical devices. Well, we wanted to read the definition here of cosmetics so that you all had it, those of you who don't have the book in front of you right now. And I should have prepared to read it, but I'm going to say it right now because it's... Here we go. Section 201 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines a cosmetic as, quote, number one, an article intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body, or any part thereof, for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. And number two, an article intended for use as a component of any such article, except that such a term shall not include soap. Okay, so soap isn't a cosmetic. I was reading somewhere that perfumes and antiperspirants are not a substitute for soap, and there you have it as written in law, embodied in law, that soap is excluded. So. The way the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act handles these is our old classic way of adulterated or misbranded. And the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines a cosmetic as adulterated if any one of these 5 conditions is met. It bears a poisonous, injurious substance. It is filthy, putrid, or decomposed. So even if it doesn't hurt you, if it's nasty, and I think that the rule that is applied is you know it when you see it, then it is adulterated. If it is prepared under any unsanitary conditions, so it doesn't have to be nasty and it doesn't have to hurt you, but if they made it somewhere that is gross, rats running all over the place, then it is also adulterated. If its container is poisonous or injurious, so the product itself isn't a problem, but the container is a problem, then it is adulterated. Or if it contains any unsafe color additive. There is an exemption for hair dyes. God only knows why. It goes back to the 1938. It has been carried forward all this time. Hair dyes have been shown to be associated with bladder cancer, so they're exempted from that too. The Delaney Clause I'm talking about. So hair dyes from coal tar, specifically hair dyes from coal tars, are exempted from the unsafe color additive, a component of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act Stipulation of Adulterated. Some chemicals, if there is just the mere presence of them, will make it adulterated. So there's an antibacterial bithionol, and mercury in eye makeup, and vinyl chloride used as a propellant, and some halogenated salicylides are all just the presence of a particular component will make it adulterated. So there's adulterated and then there's misbranded, and the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act says that cosmetics are misbranded if the labeling is false, if it doesn't include the name or place of business, or an accurate quantity of how much stuff you've got. If the required words, and you'll hear more about what words are required under certain cases, are not included, or I'm sorry, if they can't be read, even if they're there, but they can't be read or understood by the ordinary customer at the time of purchase, then it is misbranded. And if the container is made in a misleading way in any ways, if the color additive is not in conformity with Section 721, or if it is not in conformity with the Poison Prevention Packaging Act of 1970, which defines a way to try to keep little children out of poisonous articles. As you know, well, you don't know yet, but there is no pre-market approval for cosmetics. You make it, you can go out and you can go sell it. You don't have to send it off to the FDA as you do for drugs or medical devices and receive antecedent approval before you do that. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act enacted labeling requirements for products that have not been substantiated for safety before their marketing. Okay, so if it's misbranded, if two things occur, if the substantiation is not available and it doesn't include a special disclaimer statement. So if you have some substantiation available that the product, the cosmetic, is safe, then you can go forward. And exactly what constitutes substantiation is all a separate issue. But if you don't have substantiation, you can still go forward so long as you say, quote, "Warning, the safety of this product has not been determined." And so you will see that on many packages of cosmetics. The substantiation requirement does not require new testing in every case where a reasonable scientific opinion would regard the data as adequate. So much looser controls you can see here over cosmetics. The only ingredients that have to be improved or listed are listed as in sent to the FDA and listed are color additives. Certain color additives also have to be certified. They have to be batch approved by the FDA. So the approvals are for it has to say whether it's approved for food or the color additives are approved for food use or for cosmetic use specifically, for which conditions they can be applied, such as whether or not they can or cannot be applied to the eye. It's a big issue with cosmetics. Blindness has resulted from adverse events from cosmetics. I mean, this is really bad. Okay, this is really bad, serious stuff when something men or women, usually women, put on to beautify themselves ends up making them blind. So unapproved use of color additive makes it adulterated and subject to seizure. This all comes from the Color Additives Amendment Act of 1960, which we mentioned in an earlier lecture. You can't use it unless it says you can use it. Okay, so that's the basic idea with color additives. You can't go out and use something new unless you have prior approval for using a color additive. Also note that the Delaney Clause applies to the Color Additives Amendment Acts of 1960. And the courts have interpreted this to mean that Congress meant even what's called a de minimis cancer causation in animals. Okay, so if you can show that this product, this color additive, causes cancer in animals under any circumstances, then you're in violation of the Delaney Clause and it can't be included in any cosmetics either, just like foods and drugs. Just like foods, excuse me. Just like foods, not drugs. There's an exemption from adulteration for hair dye. Oh, so I'm sorry, let me get this straight. The Delaney Clause applies specifically to color additives. All right, and I believe that would include color additives which are used in prescription drugs as well. I think I need to look this particular extent of the Delaney Clause up. I'll try to edit this tape before I make it go live, but if I don't, I will edit it afterwards. Okay, so the exemption from adulteration from hair dyes stems from the 1938 law, as I mentioned. hair dyes are misbranded unless it contains this statement. Caution, quote, caution, this product contains ingredients which may cause skin irritation on certain individuals, and a preliminary test according to the accompanying directions should be made first. This product must not be used for dyeing the eyelashes or eyebrows. To do so may cause blindness. And the label also has to include some information on quite how to do that patch test. So I'm talking about a patch test for sensitivity, for hypersensitivity as well to the hair dyes. So that is in there, even though hair dyes are exempted from the color additive clause of the Delaney Clause, because as we know, hair dyes cause cancer, and yet people insist on using them. Go figure. The FDA enforcement through random inspections at factories. So most of the FDA enforcement occurs in the cop on the beat kind of way. Random inspections at factories on the borders. You don't need to. The FDA doesn't need to notify you in advance of doing these inspections. It's much weaker authority at the inspection site, though. That what happens at the inspection isn't as extensive as it is with drugs and foods. Manufacturers needn't supply the inspector with a master formula, for example, okay, or safety testing data, or consumer complaint files. The inspector doesn't get any of that stuff. They don't have to provide you with any information on adverse events that have occurred or been reported. No financial data is reportable. No other business records are reportable to the inspector. But the inspector, the manufacturer must supply shipping records if that's asked for. There's some questions about whether or not they can take photographs, but the FDA says we can, and they do. And the manufacturers say, no, you don't have the legal authority to do that, and that's sort of batting back and forth. And the FDA can take samples. FDAMA, the FDAMA of 1997 allows facilities that manufacture drugs or products regulated by as both cosmetics and drugs, and you're going to hear that a lot of what you might think is a cosmetic is actually regulated as a drug, such as an antiperspirant, because it alters the structure function of the body, and sunscreen, for example. Those are regulated as drugs as well. So FDAMA says that if a place makes both a drug and the products are regulated as both drugs and foods, drugs and cosmetics, then they can be interpreted to the same extent as prescription drug manufacturers. So under the over-the-counter or prescription drug manufacturer facility inspection rules, FDA can request a whole lot of stuff, including all the stuff that I said that isn't regulated. So, but not for cosmetics that are not drugs. They are strictly limited. Labeling deficiencies, one of the biggest issues with labeling is that sometimes the label will turn a cosmetic into a drug. Okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the distinction between the two. Industry self-regulates more. The cosmetic industry self-regulates a lot more than other industries, more than drugs or foods. The cosmetic industry, in fact, because their business, industry and regulators go hand in hand. Industry actually needs regulators to set ground rules so that good manufacturers are not pulled down the rat trap with a lot of poor manufacturers who cause adverse health events. And so industry has, the cosmetic industry specifically, has gone on record as requesting additional regulation from FDA, which generally FDA has declined because they don't have the resources to do it, and suggested instead a self-regulation system. And so more than any other of the industries we've talked about, the cosmetic industry has developed a pretty admirable system of self-registration. Industry invented the Cosmetic Ingredient Review, or CIR, by its trade association, the equivalent of pharma or bio. The Cosmetic Trade Association is the Cosmetic Toiletries and Fragrance Association, CTFA. And it was designed, the CIR, the Cosmetic Ingredient Review, to substantiate ingredient safety, we talked about substantiation, without having duplication, without having everybody have to retest the same ingredients. So the emphasis was on, let's make that safety substantiation, but let's not have to duplicate everything, okay? So the way that they do this is that they have available scientific data reviewed by 7 expert members. The conclusions are publicly announced. The scientists are nominated from several different sources. 3 non-voting members come from consumers, industry, and the FDA. There are several different stages of review. The scientific literature review is the first one, where there's public comment opportunities. After a public comment is included, the panel issues what's called the Tentative Report, and they come up with 1 of 4 conclusions on each of the ingredients that they're considering. 1 is that the ingredient is safe as used, 2 that it's safe with certain qualifications, 3 that it's unsafe, or 4 that there's insufficient data to say which of the previous 3 it is. After 60 days of more comments, then a final report is published. So the primary goal is to minimize duplication. So a lot of things are specifically excluded from their review, and those include over-the-counter drug active ingredients, fragrance ingredients, which is done by other group, or color additives. You should also know that there are voluntary, so not only is there self-regulation through this system, which is incredibly admirable how well it has worked, to tell you the truth. But there's also voluntary programs that the FDA has set up. There's 2 voluntary registration programs administered by FDA. One is a facility registration, in which the FDA says, oh, okay, all you facilities that are making cosmetics, if you'd like to, please let us know that you're making cosmetics. And the second is an ingredient statement. Both of those are voluntary, but they allow FDA to help manufacturers with adverse event notification issues. And so it certainly increases and enhances communication between the agency and the regulators, and good quality manufacturers of cosmetics will want to be part of these voluntary programs because it is in their interest. Finally, there is a voluntary industry code of practice which was instituted in January of 2007, and that code of practice embraces a lot of the underlying safety concerns. So there's an important distinction between cosmetics and drugs, and cosmetics can slide into drugs. I don't think drugs generally slide into cosmetics, because the cosmetic regulations are so much weaker than the drug regulations. The drug ones are the ones that prevail for the most part in terms of the economic impact of the two. So the key word use here is, quote, intended for use. How is the product intended to be used? The intention is determined by claims in the advertising or the labeling. So there are 2 definitions, one definition for cosmetics, one definition for drugs, and those definitions include how it's intended to be used. The manufacturer can intend for the product to be both, if they make both cosmetic and drug claims, such as I mentioned already, antiperspirants. So it has to comply with both the drug and the cosmetic rules. There are 3 seminal cases. I mentioned in the first lecture that case law is how things are determined going forward. Well, there are 3 seminal cases that determine and guide all future cases, or most future cases, with regards to whether a product is a cosmetic or a drug. There was a product called Sudden Change, which was a face cream, and it represented itself in advertising as, quote, a facelift without surgery. And these claims made the product a drug instead of a cosmetic, because it claimed that it could alter the structure and function, well, especially structure, of the body. It became a drug. There's another one called Line Away, which was a tightening of the facial skin, and it claimed to give a tightening of the facial skin. And that too converted this product from a cosmetic into a drug and had to be regulated as a drug. And finally, the one Magic Secret, which claimed to be pure protein and give an astringent sensation, was determined by the courts not to be a drug. So there is a line. These three cases determine what the line is, and it is possible for a face cream to become a drug in this regard. So FDA applies the standards of, quote, the ignorant, unthinking, and credulous, like all believing, consumer to the label in the determination. So it's not a case of buyer beware here, okay? It's a case of the ignorant, unthinking, and all believing consumer. The mere presence of some ingredients, however, will automatically make it a drug, even regardless of the claims, such as if there's a hormone in there, it's a drug, okay? So labeling requirements. Labeling requirements for cosmetics fall under two rules. One is the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and the other is the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. There is distinction between the immediate container and the outside container, and there are lots of underlying rules to assure. The focus is to assure to the consumer at the point of sale. So, and then there's the shipping container, right? So there's at least 3 levels of containers in these things. Then there's the cellophane container. So all these rules are very detailed with regards to what has to be printed on what container. The principal display panel is an important concept. That's the part of the panel most likely to be displayed, presented, or shown or examined under normal and customary conditions of display for retail sale. So the principal display panel has to have the identity and the quantity, and since 1992 it's had to have both English and metric included in it for the quantities. Okay? So you have to state the manufacturer address so that you can trace the stuff back if it goes bad. The ingredients have to be listed as per the FPLA, but they can be exempt under certain generics. So you can say, quote, fragrances instead of saying every particular fragrance, or, quote, flavors. And also the FDA can grant a trade secret exemption if it meets the criteria. Warnings have to be on both the inner and the outer containers. And finally, as I mentioned, soaps are exempted from being considered as cosmetics. So this has been a short lecture today on cosmetics, and the reason is because the underlying regulations are weak, but they exist. They are important. They're a cornerstone of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and they're important for public health safety. And with this, we leave you until we take the much broader topic next week of food and food regulation, something we have needed since time immemorial. And I'm going to go get some myself. Take care. Bye-bye.